Imagine spending 30 years building what many people genuinely called the safest, most financially attractive city on the planet. Hundreds of billions of dollars poured into skyscrapers, world-class airports, luxury hotels, and zero tax policies, all designed to pull in the wealthiest individuals from every corner of the globe. And according to multiple reports and migration tracking firms, it actually worked. Millionaires were flooding in, businesses were relocating, property prices were climbing. But according to analysts and economists who study this region closely, a series of events in early 2025 began putting serious pressure on that entire model. And if you think this is just a distant Middle East story that has nothing to do with you, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why economists argue this situation connects directly to global energy markets, supply chains, and financial systems that affect people everywhere. Welcome to Strategic Dynamics Edge. This channel breaks down the world's biggest economic and geopolitical events in a way that actually makes sense. If that's what you're here for, subscribe right now and hit the bell so you never miss an upload. And if this video gives you something to think about, share it with someone who needs the bigger picture. Now let's get into it. Before we go any further, an important note. Everything discussed in this video is drawn from publicly reported information, economic analysis, and commentary from researchers and financial observers. We are presenting multiple perspectives for educational purposes only. We are not making verified claims about active military operations, and we are not endorsing any political position. Where events are disputed or still developing, we will say so clearly. Our goal is economic understanding, not sensationalism. Now, to understand why analysts are raising serious concerns about the Gulf states right now, you have to go back roughly 30 years and understand the strategy these countries staked their entire future on. The Gulf states, and particularly the UAE and Dubai, have long understood that oil dependency is a vulnerability. History has shown repeatedly that economies built on a single commodity are fragile. When oil prices collapsed in the 1980s, entire nations that had built their budgets around it faced severe crises. The Gulf leadership saw that writing on the wall and decided to act early. The plan was to transform these countries into global hubs for wealthy individuals and international business. The strategy involved offering near zero personal income taxes, building luxury infrastructure that rivaled anywhere on Earth, connecting these cities to the rest of the world through heavily government-subsidized airlines, and aggressively marketing the region as a safe, politically neutral, and convenient base for the global elite. The ambition, as economists have described it, was to become the new Singapore, the new Switzerland, the new Hong Kong. A place where money could flow freely, stay largely untaxed, and grow without the regulatory friction of traditional Western economies. And by most measurable standards, it produced extraordinary results. According to data cited by economists and migration research firms, Dubai's non-oil sector now accounts for roughly 95% of its total economic output, which represents a remarkable shift for a region that was essentially a small desert trading port just 50 years ago. The population of the UAE is reported to have grown from around 370,000 people in 1990 to well over 3.5 million today, with the vast majority being foreign nationals. According to migration tracking organizations, the UAE attracted an estimated 6,700 high-net-worth individuals as net new residents in 2024 alone, reportedly making it the top destination globally for millionaire migration for the second consecutive year. Analysts projected that figure could grow toward 10,000 in 2025, bringing with them billions in direct capital inflows that, according to some estimates, represented nearly half of Dubai's total foreign direct investment. The model appeared to be working. Then came the events that economists say may have fundamentally changed the calculation. According to multiple international media reports, tensions in the broader Gulf region escalated significantly in early 2025 following military exchanges between Iran, the United States, and Israel. Reports from various outlets described incidents involving aerial attacks in and around the UAE, though details remain disputed, and the UAE government has not released comprehensive public information about the extent of any damage. What is not disputed is that the region entered a period of serious military and geopolitical tension, and that this tension has had measurable economic consequences. Economists and financial analysts point to three specific areas of concern that they argue represent real structural risk to the Gulf economic model. The first is the potential disruption to the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula is one of the most critical shipping choke points in the world. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, roughly 20% of all global petroleum liquids and approximately a third of all seaborne crude oil trade typically pass through this strait. Analysts argue that any sustained disruption to this passage would not be a regional inconvenience, but a genuine global energy shock, with cascading effects on oil and gas prices worldwide. Qatar and the UAE together account for a significant share of global liquefied natural gas exports, and the vast majority of those exports transit through the same corridor. Multiple economists have noted that the combination of higher energy prices and constrained supply is precisely the kind of external shock that can tip already fragile economies into stagflation. The second area of concern flagged by analysts relates to the structural vulnerabilities of Gulf cities themselves. Researchers who study urban planning and resource economics have long pointed out that the Gulf states have built some of the world's largest population centers in some of the world's most inhospitable environments. The UAE is widely reported to import more than 90% of its food supply, the majority of which arrives through maritime routes. Desalination plants supply the overwhelming majority of fresh water for populations across the region, and according to published research on Gulf infrastructure, these plants are highly concentrated, making them theoretically vulnerable to disruption. Analysts have argued for years that this dependence on uninterrupted supply chains is the region's single greatest long-term vulnerability, independent of any specific military conflict. The third, and arguably most consequential concern that economists raise, is the damage to what they call the confidence foundation of the Gulf economic model. And this is the piece of the puzzle that most people underestimate. The entire Gulf growth strategy, every element of it, ultimately rests on one thing: the belief held by wealthy individuals and international businesses that these cities are stable, safe, predictable, and worth the trade-offs involved in relocating there. Nobody moves their family and their financial assets to a country with no democratic protections and no social safety net purely out of affection for the place. They do it because the math makes sense to them. Low taxes, strong business opportunity, excellent infrastructure, and an acceptable level of risk. Analysts argue that when that risk calculation changes, even just in perception, the consequences for the Gulf model are severe and potentially self-reinforcing. Reports from several international media outlets described government restrictions on social media sharing of information related to the regional escalation. Researchers who study authoritarian governance and investor confidence have argued that these kinds of information restrictions, regardless of the government's rationale, send a powerful signal to the wealthy expatriate community. The signal is that the freedoms they believed they had are conditional. They exist at the pleasure of the government, and they can be revoked whenever the government decides they are inconvenient. For many wealthy residents whose entire reason for being there was the combination of financial freedom and a certain quality of life, analysts say that signal can outweigh the actual physical risk of the events themselves. The economic data that has emerged since the escalation began supports this concern. Airlines operating out of the region reportedly canceled tens of thousands of flights, and Emirates Airline, according to reports citing airline industry analysts, faced significant losses in revenue and missed opportunities during the period of disruption. Tourism, which had grown into a major industry in its own right, reportedly declined sharply. And perhaps most importantly for the long-term model, analysts note that the projected influx of new millionaire residents for 2025 is now deeply uncertain. This matters enormously because of how the Gulf economic model actually works underneath the surface. Economists who study Dubai specifically have noted that real estate has become the single largest sector of its non-oil economy, growing larger than the oil sector itself by a significant margin. In 2024, according to publicly reported figures, Dubai recorded over 217,000 real estate transactions, valued at over 526 billion dirhams, representing roughly 143 billion US dollars. Foreign nationals reportedly hold around 43% of the total value of all residential property in the city, and a substantial portion of that is not being used as a primary residence. It is being held as a tax-efficient investment vehicle in a jurisdiction with no capital gains tax. Analysts compare this pattern to what has occurred in cities like London, Vancouver, and New York, where foreign capital inflates property values well beyond what local demand alone could sustain. The difference, economists argue, is that in London or New York, there's a massive domestic economy underneath that can absorb shocks if foreign demand retreats. In Dubai, the foreign demand essentially is the demand, which means, as several analysts have noted, that if wealthy buyers slow their entry into the market or existing owners begin trying to exit simultaneously, the resulting correction could be severe. Over 300,000 new residential units are reportedly under construction in Dubai right now, most planned under the assumption that demand from wealthy immigrants would continue growing. If those units come onto a market where demand has collapsed, analysts warn of a scenario similar to what unfolded in Ireland and Spain before the 2008 financial crisis, where an economy that had become too reliant on construction and real estate experienced a cascading financial shock when confidence turned. There is also a dimension to this story that rarely gets the attention it deserves, and that is the impact on migrant workers. The Gulf states are home to millions of low-wage laborers from South and Southeast Asia, many of them from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and the Philippines. These workers typically exist in far more precarious conditions than the wealthy expatriates, who dominate the economic narrative. If construction slows and businesses contract, economists note that these workers are almost certainly the last priority when governments organize evacuation or assistance. The remittances they send home are not trivial. Researchers who study economies like Pakistan have documented that remittances from Gulf workers represent a meaningful share of foreign currency inflows. A sustained slowdown in Gulf employment would ripple through some of the world's most economically vulnerable countries. The deeper economic lesson that historians and economists point to in all of this is that confidence-based growth models are structurally fragile in ways that are easy to ignore during the good times. Lebanon is often cited as the most sobering example. Once described as the financial capital of the Arab world, Beirut built a reputation over decades as a stable, sophisticated hub for regional capital. Conflict and institutional collapse destroyed that reputation, and Lebanon has never recovered it. Economists are careful to note that Dubai has resources, institutional capacity, and geopolitical backing that Lebanon never possessed. But the fundamental principle, they argue, holds. Reputations built over 30 years of careful positioning can be damaged in 30 days, and rebuilding them takes far longer than building them in the first place. None of this means the Gulf states are finished. Sovereign wealth funds provide meaningful buffers. Oil revenues, when the straits reopen, would benefit from elevated global prices. And these governments have demonstrated over decades a genuine capacity for rapid adaptation and investment. But analysts argue the events of early 2025 have exposed vulnerabilities that optimistic narratives about Gulf growth were systematically underplaying. The question economic observers are now asking is not whether there will be a correction, but how deep it goes and how long confidence takes to return. That is the story worth understanding. Not because it's dramatic, but because the economic mechanics at play here connect to energy prices, global supply chains, migrant remittances, and the broader question of where mobile capital flows in an increasingly unstable world. Those questions matter for everyone, not just the people living in the Gulf. If this kind of analysis is what you come to YouTube for, make sure you're subscribed to Strategic Dynamics Edge. Hit the like button if this added something to your understanding. Drop a comment below with your perspective on where Dubai goes from here, and share this video with someone who's been watching the headlines without getting the economic context behind them. See you in the next one.